Hi, I'm Dr. Ruby Payne, and I want to talk a little bit about this whole concept of economic diversity, how poverty, middle class, and wealth impact your thinking, and how schools tend to be operating and institutions from this quote unquote middle class perspective, which is really a perspective of stability. And we're going to look at poverty from a survival instability point of view and the whole concept of resources and how that impacts your thinking. Also going to look at wealth and what that does, new money and old money, to individuals' thinking. And when we revised the book, the first book, A Framework for Understanding Poverty, was written for educators. There's another book called Bridges that is written for community organizations who do not work with young children. But I want to say a little bit about how this got started and a little bit about some of the basic constructs of economic diversity. Basically, my first husband, who passed away in 2010, was he was Cherokee and Caucasian, and he lived in extreme poverty. And when I got to know his neighborhood, I couldn't really understand why people made some of the decisions they did, their thinking. And I learned right away that it wasn't too much about intelligence, because he had the smartest family I've ever met. He had 3 siblings with IQs over 150. So, and I learned it wasn't necessarily about money, because there were a lot of people in that neighborhood who actually made more money than I did as a beginning teacher. So I wanted to understand. And then he took a job in the Chicago Board of Trade, and we were thrown in with very wealthy people, and I didn't understand, quote unquote, the hidden rules of wealth. Let me ask you this. How many of you have ever been in a social setting and it was so uncomfortable you could not wait to leave? Well, it's those nonverbals, those hidden things that people are doing. They know whether you belong or not. And we have them by race, we have them by religion, we have them by region of the country, but we have them by class too. And I didn't really know them. And so I learned the hidden rules of wealth. And I wouldn't have done anything with it. But I was the director of professional development for a school district east of Houston. And I had a principal come to me one summer, and she said, Ruby, you've got to do something about it. Last year we had 800 kids, 900 discipline referrals. She said, if I have another year like this, I'm just not going to make it. I said, well, what's your data say? She said, well, the data doesn't help. So I asked her for a story or an example of what she was talking about. And she said, well, Ruby, we've got these 2 sets of twins in the building. They got 2 sets of clothes. They wear one set one day, one set the next. So I asked the mother, if for the holidays, could I give them some $200 for clothes? And the mother said, yes. So I gave her the money. After the holidays, the girls came back with the same clothes. She said, I called one of the little girls in, asked her what happened. The little girl said, well, we never had a DVD player. We bought one. And I said to the principal, if I had been the mother, I would have done the same thing. And she said, you can't be serious. And I said, I am. I said, look, poverty is painful. And one of the tools you have to deal with it is entertainment. It takes away the pain. So, but they needed those clothes. I said, did they ask you for them? And she said, no. And I said, how did you decide? And she was having so much difficulty with the concept, I finally told her a story from wealth. And I'm going to tell you the same story, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked her. I was in this woman's home on the North Shore of Chicago when my former husband was in the Chicago Board of Trade. And this woman had probably, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and $25 million worth of original art. It was stunning, okay? And she believed she was poor because she knew somebody had a fully staffed and maintained yacht, okay? But she had a Picasso, or I believed it to be a Picasso. And I said to her, that looks like a Picasso. And she looked at me and she said, it is, okay? I learned if you want to insult someone with wealth, you infer their artwork is a replica. It was, at that time, a $1.4 million Picasso. So this is the question I'm going to ask you that I asked her. If someone gave you a multi-million-dollar Picasso, what would you do with it? You'd sell it. And you'd be thinking, hey, I lived this long without a Picasso. I'll bet I can live some more. And I said, that's what the girls were thinking about their clothes. So one question led to another. She said, you need to share this with teachers. I went and shared it with teachers. They told other teachers. Pretty soon people were calling me for information. It took a time to explain basics. And so finally I put it in writing. And it's what you have in front of you. Well, at the time, it focused on financial poverty. Now, as the work has grown, we focused more on economic diversity and what that means as you serve your total student population and why it's becoming more and more difficult to educate. And we don't use social justice theory. I need to explain this very quickly. Social justice theory looks at the systems issues that create class. And there's 4 well-researched separate databases about it. One is the behaviors of the individual. The second one is the resources of the community, which is housing, jobs, transportation. In other words, you can make all the right individual choices, but if there's no housing, no transportation, or jobs in your community, you still have a problem. The third one is exploitation, racism, sexism, predators, all the ways that people get exploited. And then last one is political and economic structures, laws that are put in place that make it very difficult to go through hurdles. Like, for example, one of the things that impacts the school business is the fact that Algebra 1 is, of course, you have to graduate from high school. About 40% of high school algebra teachers are not credentialed in math because there's a shortage. So you begin to see how that is very discriminatory at a structural level. What we use, and basically when we work in communities, we say that if you just pick one of these causes to work on, you'll never change the paradigm. They all contribute to the issue. Well, what we use in my work is this concept of social cognition. In other words, the cognitive frame that we think with. In other words, we know from the brain research that your emotional self is highly structured by the time you're 3. And about 85 to 90% of that structuring is your environment. And one of the earliest things your brain has to do in development is figure out what to pay attention to. That's how your amygdala gets developed. And what you're doing is you're figuring out, do I like it or not? Is it safe? Do I belong? And that is the basis of sorting everything from the time of birth to figure out what do I need to pay attention to stay alive? And that's how you assign meaning. And you operate off that knowledge base. If you've ever done something and then you said to yourself, oh no, that's my mother again, that's my father. It's something you learned in the first 3 years of life before you had vocabulary and you assigned it value or meaning, okay? And so what happens to shape thinking for people is the demands of their environment. What do I have to do to survive? Who do I know and what do I know? Okay, relationships and entertainment, relationships and knowledge. And what are my resources I can manipulate? And in the book, we talk about 8 resources: financial, emotional, mental, spiritual, physical. Does your body work? Relationships and role models, support systems, families, friends, all the knowledge bases, all the ways that you're supported in what you do. Hidden rules. Do you know how to negotiate an environment so you're not ostracized or isolated? Okay. These are all things that help you negotiate your environment. And that's called social cognition. It's Bandura's work. And one of the things we look at are these resources that are in front of you. Money. And one of the things we know, interestingly, is formal register, which is language. It's language that allows you to negotiate an abstract representational setting. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Everybody has language, but do you have the word choice? that allows you to negotiate contracts, legal documents, written texts, all these things that you have to negotiate an institution as you are in your environment. And one of the things we know is there's a continuum. We don't define poverty or middle class or wealth by money, because money tends not to be all that reliable of an indicator. We define it by stability. In other words, do you know where you're going to sleep at night? Do you know you got food every day? Your resources are pretty stable. I watched this documentary on TV about a guy, a 17-year-old boy in LA. He's homeless. And one of the things they asked him was, what do you do with your time? He said, well, I spend about 7 to 8 hours a day hunting for food. Now, if you are going to spend 7 to 8 hours a day hunting for food, that means that you don't have time for other things. So how you spend your time determines a lot who you know and what you know, okay? And on this chart in front of you, the more unstable your environment, the fewer your resources, the more you live on the left-hand side of the chart. The more resources you have, the more you live on the right-hand side of the chart. One of the things we know is this: as your resources become unstable, it becomes harder and harder to plan, because nothing's predictable, and planning requires predictability. On the other hand, to do well in school and work, you've got to be able to plan. They're two diametrically opposed worlds. And one of the things we know is that this then leads to this whole concept of how you move, how mobility, social mobility, how that happens and what makes that happen. Generational poverty, 2 generations or more, situational poverty, or working class, or a situation like a divorce, a death, an illness, impacts your resources. Middle class, how stable is your resource base? New money is about income, old money is about connections. And as people move on this continuum, they use part of the rules they grew up with, part of the rules they're moving to. They don't think like the people they grew up with. They don't think like the people they're moving to either. And most people now have a foot in a couple worlds. And what we're going to look at now is the fact that knowledge is actually a key form of privilege, okay? Just like social access, race, money is, okay? And knowledge bases now, because we are in an era of intellectual capital where you make money out of your head, are huge. And knowledge bases are related to time. How you spend your time determines what you know. What you see in front of you is we have a program on the community side, Getting Ahead in a Get By World. And one of the things, we've taken 100,000 adults in financial poverty through this program, and we say to them, tell us how you spend your time. What you have in front of you is a compilation of what 300 adults in poverty say they spend their time on. Agency time is time to go to agencies for help, like welfare, food bank, etc. Okay? A lot of people cite criminal justice as something on this chart that wouldn't be on their own, or legal issues, okay? This next chart is middle class. This is what people in stable environments say they spend their time on. Careers, education, mortgage payments, asset development, long hours, retirement, clubs and civic groups, political action, health prevention, shopping, social media, family and friends, children, childcare. So you see some overlap, okay? But you see a lot of new items. The last chart is what people in wealth say they spend their time on. Now, this is the wealthiest 1% of households, 10.4 million or more in net worth. This is what they say they spend their time on. Oversight of corporate property, national and international advisors, event sponsorships, media and political linkages, boards of directors, private clubs and associations, lawyers and accountants, travel. I mean, it's a different world. Now, what people want to do, see, most people have a foot in 2 circles. Some people have a foot in 3. But what most people want to do is make one circle better than another. It's not. They're all different. And if I asked you which one of these circles makes the laws that govern your institution and schools, it's this one. And which circle runs the institution of education in America? It's this circle. And at least 50% of our student population comes out of this circle. And the purpose of schooling is to, quote unquote, educate people with the goal that they can basically stabilize and participate in this circle, the institutional circle. Well, one of the things we've learned from our community work is this, that if the institutional circle doesn't change, one of the things we know is it makes because the laws are made here, okay, and the institution enacts them. One of the things, if institutions don't change, it becomes almost impossible or very difficult for people in this circle to negotiate the others. I had somebody say to me the other day, "You just want to make people middle class." And I said, no. I said, I just want people to have a choice. I said, look, if you can't read at the 9th grade reading level, you can't participate in the circle in front of you. If you can read at the 9th grade and you decide not to participate in that circle, that's fine. But the bottom line is you have a choice. And so as we start talking about economic diversity and what that looks like and how you begin to negotiate it, because these circles come with hidden rules as well. And one of the things is those often keep you from transitioning. And that's one of the reasons why a key relationship is so instrumental in allowing you to negotiate more than one world. If you want to understand this around the world, basically what happens is people around the world take their resources, they put it on an axis with their time, and they manipulate it to negotiate their reality. So middle class, the one you're looking at here, stability, if you will. If you watch them around the world, they make virtually all their decisions against three things: work, what they do with their time; achievement, they often go back to school to get a better job; and number three, developing financial assets like a mortgage, okay? And they have 4 rules about money. I don't ask you for money and you don't ask me. Number 2, if you borrow, you got to pay it back. Number 3, you never quit a job until you have another one. And number 4, you don't tell people your salary. But if you're over here in this circle, in wealth, you have a different problem. Your problem is you have too many resources to take care of by yourself. So you have to hire people to help you. And that makes you vulnerable at a personal safety level. There's so much reverse snobbery about wealth because middle class don't understand what a huge issue personal safety is in wealth. And you make your decision against your financial, your social, and your political connections, which leads to another hidden rule. When you go to a party among the truly wealthy, you don't introduce yourself. If you do, they'll turn around and walk off. You are introduced. This is so-and-so with such and such a firm or family. It's a signal that it is a signal that you are known and you belong, okay? And that's how you're going to negotiate it, okay? They'll say, if they say, this is Ruby and she's my very dear friend, you know what that means? I like her, but she's got no connections. I've been introduced that way, okay? So they're checking for your safety. And what's the rule about money and wealth? Well, you don't talk about the cost of an item. Percentages of investments, etc., yes, but cost of an item, no. But if you were in poverty, generational poverty, two generations or more, your decision making is different again because you have a different problem, okay? You have a few things, but you don't have any assets. And because your resource base is so thin, Every day is a day of instability. My brother made the slide from poverty, from middle class to poverty in 10 years. Didn't take him 2 generations. And one of the things that happened is that he lost his job. Well, he had a business. He lost a business. Brutal time to have a business. He lost the business, bounced around with employment for 2 to 3 years. During that time, he and his wife had a severely handicapped child. The child's now in his 20s and he cannot feed himself. So that knocked a wager around the household. And then my brother got sick, but he didn't go to the doctor right away. Okay, and when he finally did, and they finally diagnosed him, he had a degenerative illness that was so advanced, he couldn't work. And then he got cancer and died. I gave him money every month, several $100s. I paid for where he lived. And his sister gave him cash, and another sister paid the utilities. Another brother bought him gasoline. We all got together and bought him a vehicle. But he didn't make his decisions based on, work and achievement and material security. He made his decisions based upon relationships, survival, and entertainment. People became his possession. And when people become your possession, the rules change. That's why often in generational poverty, not situational, generational poverty, parents will fear children getting too educated, because when they get too educated, they leave. And in poor white neighborhoods, they say things like, you're getting above your raisins, you're too big for your britches. In poor African-American neighborhoods, they call them Oreos. Poor Hispanic neighborhoods, coconuts. Poor Asian neighborhoods, bananas. Poor Native American Indian neighborhoods, apples. The issue is, we're afraid we're going to lose you. And what's the rule about money and poverty? If I have any, you got to share with me. Money's communal. And that makes math all that much harder in school, because middle class teaches math to children with money. And you don't have any money, or you only use debit cards, it's hard. And this then translates in myriad ways in the school business and in life in general. And one of the biggest ways is how you use language and the amount of language you have access to. Another one is how you understand abstract representational systems, okay? And that is the whole concept of how you represent things on paper abstractly rather than in the 3D dimension of real life. How do you do that? How do you understand those abstract constructs, and how do you negotiate them? It impacts how you talk to each other. It impacts how you resolve conflict. It impacts how you negotiate. In one of the well-lauded studies of looking at how people parent their children, it was a study of Black, African Americans, and whites and how they parent their children. And basically what they saw was this. If it didn't, the race was not a key issue as much as the educational attainment level. If the parents were in poverty and not well educated, regardless of their race, one of the things was they parented their children to be more reactive to school, to react to it, whereas educated households taught their children to negotiate the institution using language. It's two very different realities. And one of the things we know is it's a key factor in how we begin to help with the transition and the social mobility. There is stickiness at the ends. If you were born in poverty, there's a tendency for you to stay in poverty. If you were born in wealth, there's a tendency to stay in wealth. There's stickiness at the ends, but there's also transition. And one of the key ways is education. This new book, the new version of the book, has a chapter in there on immigration and how that impacts. It has a chapter on the intersection between poverty and health, poverty and race, poverty and gender, poverty and immigration status. And it begins to look at some of the brain research around how poverty impacts children. But one of the things it does is it really provides very concrete strategic tools to better educate our children. So it's all about economic diversity, I would love to be able to work with you. Thank you.